Hello, at 1,000 subscribers, I will make a special series of stories for you. Dust Creek wore the evening like an old coat frayed at the cuffs, pockets full of grit. The sun slipped behind the badlands, leaving the flats washed in copper and long shadow blues. Far from town, at the edge of sage and emptiness, Caleb Ward worked a fence with the patience of a man who had outlasted worse things than splinters. He had wire in his left hand, pliers in his right, and a knifed streak of rain on the horizon that promised to be late and mean. His ranch wasn't much, too. Look at a rectangle of corral, a weather-gray barn with a roof like a busted grin, a salt-bleached windmill that coughed more than it turned. He had built it in step-stew boards forward, one memory back after the raiders took the old place, and the woman he loved with it. Folks said lonely men grow quiet or bitter. Caleb had grown both, the quiet lying on him like dust. The bitterness kept folded up the way a man keeps a letter he'd rather not read again. The wire sang in his hands as he twisted it, tight enough to keep cattle honest. Coyotes yipped across the wash. A hawk made a lazy wheel over the cottonwoods by the creek. It was the kind of evening you could forget there were other people anywhere at all. Then he heard it, a sound drawn thin as thread by the wind. Not animal, human. A single word in it, no, but the rest torn to shreds by distance. Caleb straightened, squinting toward the riverbed where red rock combed the current into froth. The wind hit him full in the face, hot with the days. Leftover heat and the dust a storm stirs up when it's still a county away. The cry came again, softer, a scrape rather than a sound, and the horses in the corral lifted their heads. He didn't shout back. No use throwing a voice into a wind that ate everything. He dropped the pliers into his pocket, slung the coil of wire over the post, and checked the rifle in the saddle, scabbard out of habit, not fear. Fear was a thing with a short life on the range. The gelding mud brown mule stubborn picked his way through rabbit brush as Caleb rode down the slope to Dust Creek. He saw the mark first, a skid in the sand where a body had been dragged or had crawled, the line full of elbow prints and grit-darkened blood. He followed it under the cottonwoods to a clutch of willow whose roots held the bank like a prayer. She lay face down in the shadow, half in the water, the current tugging at her dress. Torn fabric, bare feet. Hair stuck to her cheek in black ropes. Lashes clotted with silt. Caleb slid off the gelding and went to one knee. "Ma'am," he said, because the West still had manners, even when it had nothing else. "You hear me?" She flinched at his voice. He touched her shoulder, careful as a man handling eggs, and she tried to turn away, breath rasping. When his hands went under her to lift, she made a sound that was almost laughter, almost a sob. "No more pain," she whispered, eyes shut against the sky. "My ribs are already broken." "Then we don't break them further," he said. "We do this slow." He fetched a canteen, trickled water into her mouth. She coughed, swallowed, coughed again, and got 2 good sips down before her head sank back. Up close he saw the bruises. Blooming on her side, the skin an ugly tide of purple and yellow. The kind of work done by boots or a man with too much time and not enough soul. A rope burn ringed one wrist. Another cut across the back of her knee, ground full of river sand. A short way downstream, the creek widened into a shallow crossing. Caleb waited there, boots filling, and came back with willow switches he stripped smooth with his knife. He split one lengthwise, wrapped it in the rag from his saddlebag, and made a brace for her side, the way the army doctor had shown him once when men fell from skittish horses and got back up crooked. He worked quiet, eyes down, listening to her, breath as much as to the wind. When he set the brace against her and cinched it with a strip torn from his own shirt, she hissed between her teeth, but didn't cry out. "What's your name?" He asked, Because names anchor people, keep them from drifting off. Her eyes flicked open. There was a look in them he recognized, the faraway look of a person who has ridden too many miles of night and might be willing to keep riding if only to outrun memory. Later, she said. Her voice was a ghost in her throat. All right, later. He slid his arms beneath her shoulders and knees, the way a father lifts a sleeping child. Even careful, the move cost her, and she bit her lip until it bled. Breathe shallow, he told her. We'll get you set. He laid her across the saddle, face down to keep her ribs from grinding, and walked the gelding up the bank and toward the cabin. The trip took forever and no time at all, the kind of minutes that stretch and snap. Grasshoppers flung themselves sideways, like sparks blown off a wheel. The sky went from copper to iron. The first dry drops of the storm struck his hat brim, and burst like thrown sand. The dog's two yellow curs that were mostly vigilants on four legs came loping out from under the porch, tails cautious. Caleb lifted a hand. Off, he said, and they melted into the shadows beneath the house, still watching, as if they understood that tonight was a night for quiet. Inside, the cabin smelled of lamp oil, leather, and old wood. The plank table wore its scars honest. The iron stove clicked as it cooled. He had lined the bed with a horse blanket against the early chill of autumn nights. He rolled it back, set her down, and straightened with the creak of a man who worked alone and didn't mind it most days. He lit the lamp and turned the flame down low until the room held a patient pool of gold dot up close. Her bruises told. Longer story. Finger marks on the upper arm. The dull-edged rectangle of a buckle printed in her side. A welt that ran from shoulder blade to hip, puckered at the end like a fuse snuffed by spit. He cleaned the cuts with boiled water and the last of the carbolic acid, and she trembled but remained awake, as if sleep were a country she no longer trusted to cross into. It'll sting, he warned. Then it'll stop. She made a small, skeptical sound. When he pressed the cloth to her skin, her hand snapped for his wrist and held it tight. She had strength left, then deep strength, the kind that doesn't show until it has to. Easy, he said. I'm not going anywhere. He had a little laudanum in a corked bottle, meant for colic in horses and men who'd smashed fingers with a hammer. He held it up. This'll help. 2 swallows, not more. She eyed it the way you eye a snake that's fallen asleep on your boot. Then she nodded. He tipped the bottle, watched her throat work, took it away before it could do more harm than. Good. He wrapped her ribs with clean muslin, snug but not straitjacket tight. He slid a pillow beneath her knees to take the pull off the muscles of her back. He covered her with a quilt his wife had pieced years ago, faded blues, stubborn stitches, and turned down the lamp until the flame was a coin balanced on its edge. Only when the room had settled did he notice how loud the rain had become. It wasn't a downpour so much as a sheet of grit gusting across the windows, the kind of dry storm that rattles roofs and raises the hair on your arms. The windmill groaned. The barn door thumped its frame. Somewhere out on the flats, lightning was stalking the earth in long lead strides. Caleb sat in the chair beside the bed and waited for the storm to roll over and the medicine to do its work. He wasn't a man made for talk, but silence can be its own conversation. He took off his hat and held it in his lap. Scar-band light from the lamp picked out the lines in his hands, the white seam on his knuckles where a knife had slipped 10 years back, the freckles the sun doesn't bother washing off. After a time, her breath evened. The tightness in her jaw slackened a fraction. She looked young then. Not girlish, you don't stay girlish out here, but younger than the hurt, suggested. He watched the rise and fall of the quilt and felt something give inside him, something like an old hinge that hadn't been tended in years. He had told himself he was done rescuing what couldn't be kept, done throwing himself in front of trains that didn't care who they hit. But he also knew there are lines a man draws, so he can say who he is when no one's looking. Some lines you don't let the world cross without answering. He left her sleeping and went to the stove. Soup was a grand word for what he made jerked beef, shaved into a pot, a handful of beans, onion, water. He cut bread that was 2 days past its best, and buttered it with the last spoon from the crock. He set a bowl aside to cool, covered it with a plate to keep the dust out, then reached for the coffee and changed his mind. Laudanum and coffee shook hands poorly. Behind him, she stirred and groaned. He turned and saw her shift, face drawn, as if some memory had coaxed her to move. He went back to the chair. "Don't," he said, gentle as he could make it. "You're safe." At that, her eyes opened. They were the kind of eyes that looked like they'd been other colors once, but had darkened from use, river green or gray-hard to tell in lamplight and full of watchfulness. She studied him, the way you study a stranger who says the right words and might mean them. "Where am I?" she asked. "Ward Ranch. 15 miles from Dust Creek if you know the shortcuts, 25 if you don't. Your ward." Not a question. He allowed that with a small nod. Why? He knew what she meant, but not which part she meant it about. "Why did you stop? Why bring me here? Why any of it?" "Storm would have drowned you," he said. "And that creek keeps secrets it never ought to have had to keep." Her gaze slid to the quilt, to the wall where a nail held a kerosene slicker, and, beneath it, a woman's bonnet gone sun-bleached and lace-frayed. He didn't move to hide it. Shames. A heavy coat, and he hadn't the strength for it tonight. "I'll go in the morning," she said. "No," he replied. "You won't." The word hung between them, too bold. He softened it. "You can't. Even if you were whole, riding at first light would put you in the worst of the heat, as you are. You couldn't sit a saddle from here to the door." Flash of something like fear or pride, sometimes they looked the same, went through her. "I can walk, maybe," he said, "but I'm not letting you." The dogs thumped their tails once under the floorboards, as if casting a vote. Her mouth tightened. He saw the fight in her, a live wire under wet cloth, and he thought, "Good, the ones who've got no fight left don't last. I haven't got money," she said finally, the words a test. "I'm not asking for any." "In Dust Creek," she said, "men don't do things without asking for something. I'm not most men in Dust Creek." He caught himself. Let a breath go. "You can pay me with the truth when it doesn't cost you more blood." She turned her face toward the wall. "Truth is expensive." "I know." The lamp hissed softly. The storm guttered. The wind shifted from the north and came in colder. A board in the roof popped like a knuckle. He stood and fed the stove. When he sat, she had gone quiet again, her eyes open but far away. "Drink," he said, and slid an enameled cup into her hand. She lifted it with care and took a swallow. The water put a little life into her face. He lifted the bowl of soup next. "When you can." She looked at it like it might bite. He waited. Waiting was something he was good at. He could wait out a horse's stubborn, a blizzard's temper, a man's lies. After a time she reached, ate 3 spoonfuls, then pushed the bowl away with a small shake of her head. They sat in the hush that follows the first small victory of the night. He could feel the shape of a question at the back of his mouth. He swallowed it and let a different one out. "You got someone who'll miss you?" he asked. Her throat worked. "I don't know." Fair answer. She glanced at the door, at the shadows that lay under it like pooled smoke. "They'll come," she said. "Men always come." He lifted an eyebrow. "For you?" "For what I took from them," she said. Then her lashes lowered, and the laudanum caught up, and the line of her mouth softened until it was just a line. Nothing angry left to it. He sat a while longer, thinking on what a woman in that condition could take that a man would send other men after. A purse, a horse, a name. Sometimes a name is the most valuable thing you can steal. He thought of the saloons, 2 counties east, where women wore their shoulders bare and laughter like armor, and of the men who took what they wanted, because the room said they could. He thought of the sheriff in Dust Creek, a man who could read. The law like a drunk reads a Bible, sometimes to comfort, sometimes to justify a thing. He thought of the way rumors traveled here, faster than rail cars. Truer or not, when her breath finally settled into the deep evenness of hard sleep, he rose and took the rifle from the pegs over the door. He checked the chamber by feel, counted cartridges the way he counted heartbeats when the nightmares woke him. He set the gun back within reach. Then he crossed the floor and lifted the latch to look out at the yard. The storm had spent itself on noise more than water. Lightning was a dwindling argue-off over the range. The corral fence unfinished on the far side stood like a scribble against the dark. The air had the fresh-cut taste of rain, even though the dirt was still mostly dust. He circled the cabin once, eyes and ears open. Nothing moved but wind and the soft blow of the gelding at the gate. Back inside, he slid the bar home, added chair leg to the slot without thinking about it. The habits of a man who had been visited at his door by the worst things that travel with men. He left the lamp low and sat again, letting the quiet take him as it took the room about an hour later. The dogs lifted their heads together, ears pricked. Caleb's eyes went to the door, then the window. He didn't hear anything at first. Then faint as something remembered rather than real, the iron ring of a shoe against stone somewhere down in the draw. 1 horse, maybe 2. Hooves placed. With care, as if the rider thought care could keep the sound from traveling. He didn't move. The woman slept on, breath a small wave. The sounds came again, closer, then stopped altogether. A long minute. Wind muttered under the eaves. Caleb stood slow as a shadow. He eased the rifle from its pegs, went to the window, and set his shoulder against the frame so the floor wouldn't creak. Outside, the yard lay in scoured gray. The cottonwoods made their small talk. Nothing. No shape where a shape shouldn't be. No glint of metal or moonlit eye. Either he had imagined it, or whoever was out there had melted into the ground. He waited through 10 heartbeats. 20 more. Nothing. He breathed out, and the breath sounded too loud in his own ears. When he looked back, she had opened her eyes again. Not drowsy now. Clear. She watched the door as if expecting it to bloom open like a wound. You heard it, too, he said. She nodded. They're slower in the dark, she murmured. But they find what they look for. Not tonight, he said, giving the words a weight they'd have to do their best to carry. Not here. He propped the rifle against the wall, within reach of his hand, and sat. The chair groaned. Time stretched. A coyote yipped and got no answer. The storm trailed off as if embarrassed at having made so much noise for so little rain. Sleep, he said. You'll need your strength. Tomorrow's work always comes. For a long moment she didn't move. Then her breath eased, her hand unclenched, and the tight edge around her eyes softened back into a human shape. He watched the lamplight make a small halo on the wall, and tried not to think about what lay past the ridge, or down the road, or in the hearts of men who believed. The world owed them things outside. The wind shifted again. The night settled into its true self. On the table, the bowl of soup cooled to a skin. On the wall, the old bonnet cast a shadow like a memory you don't invite but live with anyhow. When the storm was gone, and the hush had grown thick, Caleb leaned his head back against the chair and told the room, as much as the woman, the dogs, the wind, and whatever else might have been listening. This house takes in what the desert spits out. That's the rule. It was enough of a prayer for a man who didn't pray anymore. And if there were riders in the draw, or whispers in town, or debts rolling in on tired horses, those would be faced in their turn. The West kept its own calendar and liked to cross off its days in blood. But tonight, under a crooked roof and a threadbare quilt, a small defiance had been declared. He sat his watch until the lamp gave a last stubborn gutter, and he pinched it out. The dark came in gentle. The dogs slept. The creek ticked along its stones. And the lonely rancher, who had taught himself to live without company, realized there was company in the room, unexpected, battered, alive, that he had promised safe passage through the night. Morning laid a thin shine over Dust Creek, the kind that made glass sparkle and flaws look honest. Men hosed yesterday's dust from storefronts with today's dust. The blacksmith woke his forge, and the telegraph key at Cobb's office began its usual tapping like a nervous finger. By noon the saloon doors had swung enough to creak, and the room settled into its daylight habit's quiet hands of cards, coffee mixed with whiskey, a piano with one broken key that always wanted to join. In Dot Alma Bell ran the place as steady as a clock. Tall, hair coiled close to her head, she poured drinks without getting fooled by the faces on the other side of the bar. She'd seen towns bloom and curl up like paper in a flame. Dust Creek, she figured, was a tough weed of a place. It would survive until a DIDN single quotes T. word came in on a freighter's breath. Riders in the draw at Ward's place last night, he said, dropping a sack of flour by the door. 2 shapes, maybe 3, slipped off before morning. A pause ran through the room. Not silence so much as a change of pitch the way, huh? River quiets when the banks close in. Lute Briscoe, who dealt faro with hands that looked like they were carved for the purpose, lifted his eyes. Blackthorn? He said. Who else? Alma wiped the bar. They've been smelling around the county line for a week. The freighter rolled one shoulder. Sheriff'll know. Kincaid rode out before sunup with his hat on sideways, like a man already arguing with himself. Then he'll be here next, arguing with us, Lute said. Alma topped off the freighters. Coffee. Let him. The law doesn't walk in here without having something to drink, even if it's only water and regret. At the back, a boy too young for a bar and too old for school Jesse, who ran errands for whomever paid first-edged closer. I saw a stranger by the livery, he said. Scar on his jaw. Didn't look at horses like a man who likes horses. Alma held his gaze. And what do men who don't like horses look at, Jesse? Doors, the boy said. And a road like it owes them money. Alma nodded. She knew that look. She'd watched men stare roads into giving up secrets that weren't there. She moved to the window and lifted the corner of the curtain. Across the street, Sheriff Lyle Kincaid stepped down from his roan and tied off. He had the decency to square his shoulders before he came in, as if a man could get properly dressed for a hard conversation. Kincaid, Alma said when he pushed through the batwings. Coffee? Whiskey? Neither, he said. I want 10 minutes of quiet, and I haven't seen any of that bottled lately. You'll get 5, she said, and slid him a cup anyway. On the house. You'll pay for the next one with news. He drank, eyes on the room the way a carpenter studies a crooked wall, weighing what can be saved. There's trouble. Walking, he said. You all know its name. It's always got the same face, Lute murmured. Kincaid's jaw worked. I need to talk to Ward, he said finally. And I need this town to hold steady until I do. That means no heroics, no galloping into something you can't gallop out of. Alma rinsed a glass. You ever known Dust Creek to gallop? Kincaid gave her a look that almost smiled, then set the cup down hard enough to make the coffee jump. Last night someone skirted Ward's fence. Didn't test the house. Might have been scouting. Might have been lost. Either way, I'll find out. In the meantime, he turned, raised his voice a notch. If any of you have more than rumor, you bring it to me, not to men who send fires to do their talking. Which is to say, Alma added, not unkindly, you want us to bring you. One woman, if we've got her. Kincaid didn't blink. I want this town to keep breathing, however that has to look. No one answered. In Dust Creek, breath was a private thing and choices were a personal weight. Kincaid touched his hat brim, a motion halfway between thanks and apology, and left. The swinging doors had barely settled when a different figure slipped through lean, sunburnt, jaw patched by an ugly seam of scar that dragged his grin crooked. He carried dust like perfume, the kind that comes from miles traveled mean. He took in the room with that care Jessie had noticed. Doors, windows, the slight lift in Lute's eyebrow, Alma's fingers on a bottle. He gave the piano a little nod as if to tell it not to start anything. Name's Finch, he said to no one in particular. I'm thirsty. You're a stranger, Alma said. The thirsty rate applies. 4 bits a glass. He laid a coin on the bar. 4 bits for a question too? You ask, we'll see. Finch rolled the coin under his palm like a trick he'd taught himself in a cell. You got a Ward in these parts? Quiet man, big hat, doesn't smile at jokes? Alma didn't. Turned her head. We've got a lot of quiet men who don't smile at jokes. Fair. I'm told this one has something that belongs to my employer. Your employer have a name? Finch smiled with the wrong half of his mouth. Names take time. I'm in a hurry. Alma slid him his drink. Then you'll have to pay for time you don't have. We charge double. Across the room, Jessie had gone still. Kincaid's roan snorted outside, as if it had caught a scent even a horse didn't care for. Finch lifted the glass, drank, and set it down empty. Cartoon of a town you got here, he said mildly, and walked out as if he had. All the answers on a string behind him. Alma watched the door swing until it stopped. That, she said under her breath, was the advance hand. Which means the deck's coming, Lute said. Alma only nodded and reached for a clean towel that was never quite clean. The day had shifted. Everyone could feel it. On the ward. Ranch the morning sorted itself into chores, whether a man wanted it to or not. Caleb heated the soup and set it on the stove's back ring. He boiled water and shaved with the kind of thoroughness that has nothing to do with vanity, only with being a man who keeps his edges in order when the world doesn't. He checked the window twice, without meaning to. She woke to the smell of onions and the sound of the windmill throwing a slow blade. When she tried to sit, the room tilted and her face tightened in the way a face does when it's choosing not to make a sound. Slow, Caleb said. We learned that last night. I prefer learning things once, she muttered, but she eased back down. Her voice had found a little gravel overnight less ghost, more person. He propped her with pillows, spooned soup into a bowl, and set it where she could reach. Try, he said. Not all at once. She stared at the spoon like it contained a difficult truth, and then obeyed it. After a few swallows, she set the bowl aside, wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, noticed the quilt, traced one stubborn stitch with her finger as if reading it. You have a wife? She asked without looking up. Had, he said. Before men started calling themselves by other men's names and taking what didn't belong to them. She let that sit. My name is Evelyn, she said finally, as if paying a debt. Evelyn. Kane. All right, he said. Evelyn. She tested her breath, winced, settled. You know Blackthorne? I know of him. Caleb kept his eyes on the stove. Knows the land the way a tick knows a dog. Calls himself a businessman. Hires men who don't care what the work is, so long as the money's counted right. Evelyn's mouth went thin. The counting is the point. He doesn't hide his crimes. He tallies them. Caleb turned then. You took something he tallied. Her eyes slid to the chair where his hat hung. A ledger, she said. The small one. Not the book he keeps to impress the marshal when the marshal rides through. The one he keeps for himself. Names. Amounts. What was bought with who. Where life got cheaper than a debt. Caleb let out a slow breath. That'll bring men with fire. They were already coming, she said. For me, whether I took it or not. This way, maybe a few more go to jail instead of the ground. Or maybe it makes him angry enough to make a mistake. I'll take either. She swallowed, then added, I put it under a rock by the creek when I heard hooves. I didn't think I'd make it anywhere with it, and breathing both. Good, he said. Stones don't talk. And if someone finds it before you? They won't, he said, without explaining to himself why he was so certain. Her gaze snagged on the rifle behind the door. They came last night, she said. I heard, he confirmed. They didn't come close, the kind that sniff. She nodded once. There's a man named Finch, scar on his jaw. He thinks he can raid any room like it's written for him. He scouts for Blackthorn. He'll be the nose. Caleb tucked that name away where he kept useful aches. He poured her water and stood, with his hands braced on the table as if strength could be borrowed from wood. Sheriff'll come, he said. He'll ask for you in the name of keeping town safe. Evelyn's laugh was an ugly, small thing. Men always ask for women, in the name of keeping something safe. Not all men, he said, and heard the wear in his own voice. But enough. As if to underline the point, the dogs hissed under the floorboards, the sound they made when a known boot stepped on the porch. Caleb lifted his head. He didn't bother with the rifle. He crossed and slid the bar. When he opened the door, Sheriff, Lyle Kincaid stood there with his hat in his hands, and the look a man wears when he's brought himself to a doorstep he'd rather have ridden past. Ward, Kincaid said. His eyes flicked over Caleb's shoulder, reading the room the way lawmen do. You got company. I do. Kincaid nodded, as if some part of him was relieved to have the truth visible and not a rumor he'd have to chase. I'm coming in, he said, and waited. Caleb stepped aside. Evelyn watched the sheriff the way a fox watches the opening of a trap it's already been in. Kincaid tipped his hat to her. Ma'am. Sheriff, she said. He took in her bruises, the brace tied with stripped muslin. The quilt. His mouth shut tighter. When he spoke it was to Caleb, but the words were for the room. Blackthorn sent a man into town, scout, scar on his jaw. Finch. We know, Caleb said. Kincaid grunted. He asked after you here, Ward. I told Alma I was riding out. I expect Finch will tell his boss what he wants to hear, whether he finds anything or not. He turned to Evelyn. Miss Kane. Kane, Kincaid repeated. You've got something that's going to bring heat on everyone between. Here and the state line. I've got truth, she said. It's only dangerous if men are lying. Kincaid's eyes went flat there, and not there. Truth has gotten more people killed in this county than whiskey has. I'm supposed to ask you to come with me. Protective custody, he said, and the way he said the words told you what he thought of them. But I don't have a jail that can keep Blackthorn's heat off, and I've got men in town who'd trade someone else's safety for one more year without trouble. So I'm asking you different. Can you give me what you took? No, Caleb said, and his voice had a weight. The floorboards listened too. She can't even stand. I asked her, Kincaid said, not unkindly. Evelyn lifted her chin. I can give it, not to you. To someone who'll carry it out of reach. Kincaid nodded once, as if he'd expected that. There's a deputy in Painted Rock with a backbone and the core habit of using it. He knows a marshal who isn't lazy. If we can get it to them, and if they keep their ink straight, we might turn blackthorn from something you curse into something you read about in a sentence with a period at the end. And if we can't? Caleb asked. Then we outlast him, Kincaid said. Or we don't. He looked at the door, then back at Caleb. I won't drag her, he said. But the town's going to want blood or peace, and it's easier to buy peace with someone else's blood. You know how it goes. I do. Kincaid set his hat on his head and touched the brim to Evelyn again. I'll do what I can that doesn't set the town on fire. If you can find a way to give me trouble, I can use. He looked at Caleb. Give it. I'll see what the creek's got under its rocks, Caleb said. When the sheriff left, the room eased by a degree, the way a clenched fist eases when there's nothing left to hold. Evelyn sank back and closed her eyes. He's not a bad man, she said, surprising herself by saying anything at all. No, Caleb said. He's a sore one. Soreness can make a man mean or just careful. We'll hope for careful. He fetched his hat and checked the rifle, and on second thought, the pistol he rarely wore. Evelyn opened one eye. You going to the creek? I am. They'll watch the old path. I won't take it. She closed the eye again. There's a sycamore with a split trunk, 20 paces up from the ford. A flat stone like a bread paddle. I tucked it there. She hesitated. There's a locket, too. If you have to drop weight, drop the locket. He looked at her then, in a way that told her what he'd drop first. I'll bring both, he said. Outside, heat gathered itself for the day. Caleb saddled the gelding, spoke to the dogs the way men talk to animals when they don't have anyone else to hear sense, and swung into the saddle. He took the long way, keeping the mare's hooves on rock when he could, leaving his passage as thin as smoke. He moved with the land's logic, high when eyes were close, low when they weren't, cutting his shadow into pieces the sun couldn't add up right dot at the creek. The sycamore stood where Evelyn had said. The trunk split like a question with two answers. The flat stone had silt packed against its edges by a hand in a hurry. He pried it up with his knife and found the tobacco tin tucked in a cradle of wet leaves. He opened it enough to see pages bare of virtue-tight handwriting, columns, numbers. The kind of book a gallows could read out loud. Under it lay a tiny brass locket with a crack like a smile across the hinge. Hoof marks glittered in wet sand upstream, half print, half accusation. Not his, not fresh either. The rider's from the night, maybe. Caleb put the tin and the locket under his shirt and let the stone fall back into place. The creek bubbled as if it didn't care whose names were written in any book. On the way up, he swung wide of the old path and circled back to his own fence from the east. The gelding pricked his ears. Caleb pulled up, slid from the saddle, went to one knee. In the dust near the corner post, someone had drawn the simplest of signs with the toe of a boot, a circle with a cross in it. Not a brand. A mark men used when they meant to say, "We've found you," without needing to knock. Caleb wiped it out with the heel of his palm, not because he thought it would make a difference, but because a man takes the small wins he can. Take. By sundown, the saloon had filled in the way it always did when fear got thirsty. Kincaid stood with his back to the wall and his eyes on the room while Alma poured, and Lute dealt, and Jesse listened harder than a boy should have to. Was nowhere to be seen, which meant he was everywhere that mattered. Alma leaned in toward Kincaid as she set a glass near his elbow. You get what you rode out for? I got told I've got a problem and handed one end of the rope, he said. Might be enough to pull on, enough to hang you with too. I've always been particular about whose nut I stand under. The telegraph down the street ticked an urgent little song, then fell still. A rider clattered past, hard to bit and harder to stop. Someone in the corner murmured a prayer, too quiet to oblige God to answer. When the bat wings swung again, Finch drifted in like a dust devil that had learned to wear boots. "Good evening," he said cheerfully to no one. "Tell me, does this town prefer its fires big or warming?" "We prefer them somewhere else." Alma said, "Well?" Finch sighed as if disappointed in the cuisine. "I'm afraid elsewhere is closed tonight." He leaned a hip against the far end of the bar, eyes on Kincaid. "Sheriff, there's talk you've got a woman tucked under. A blanket out by the Ward place. Talk says she's come by something doesn't belong to her. What belongs to a woman is decided by the woman." Alma said. Finch tipped his head to her. "I look forward to attending your salons, Miss Bell. Pay at the door." He turned back to Kincaid. "My employer, a friend to commerce, and good order and efficient murder," Lute put in, soft. "Asks only that property be returned and debts paid," Finch finished without ruffling. "I'm here to collect a simple thing. You can hand her over. We'll ride quiet, and Dust Creek can wake up tomorrow with all its wood unburnt." Kincaid looked at him as if selecting a word and choosing not to say it. "Your employer doesn't make the law here." "Law," Finch repeated, tasting it. "Fine word. Looks good on paper. Out here, it gets scuffed up. Then step on it. Then step lighter," Kincaid said. Finch's grin grew wrong. "You'll want to step out of the way of the men coming behind me, Sheriff. They don't place their feet careful." Alma set both palms on the bar. "You tell your employer he'll get what's owed him when he can spell the word owed without putting a knife through it." Finch shrugged and pushed off. "I'll tell him Dust Creek has a sense of theater." He paused by Jesse and flicked the boy's ear, not hard, but in a way meant to be remembered. "Go to bed, kid," he said. "Tomorrow's going to be educational." He left. The bat wing swayed, stopped, left the room holding its breath even when it pretended not to. Kincaid drained his glass and set it down. "Alma," he said quietly, "if I ask for the bell, will you ring it?" She reached under the bar and laid. A hand on the iron tongue of the little black church bell hung there for fights you couldn't drink your way out of. "You ask, I ring." "Not yet," he said. "Let's not make a fuss until the fuss rides in demanding to be made." He stepped out onto the street. The daylight had gone purplish, the kind that turns faces into silhouettes and good intentions, into shapes without edges. He looked south toward the county line, and he saw what men who've kept watch learned to see. Lanterns moving slow along a ridge, then winking out all at once. "Tonight," Kincaid said to the air, "we'll all sleep where we stand." Back at the ranch, Caleb slid the tobacco tin and the locket into a flour sack and tucked the sack inside a feed barrel. He checked the door, the window, the saddle girth, as if readiness could be retrofitted to every object he owned. Evelyn watched him do it with a quiet that wasn't surrender, only calculation. "You got it," she said. "I did. And the locket." He set it on the table. She reached for it, thumbed the crack, opened it with care. Inside, a lock of hair so fine it had almost stopped being a thing, and a scrap of paper folded too many times. She didn't unfold it. She closed the locket and set it near the lamp like an anchor dot. She drew a breath, winced, managed to speak without letting the wince take the words. "You mean to send the book with the sheriff?" "I mean to send it with someone Blackthorn doesn't know." He thought of Jesse, and then of the boy's ears, and then of Jesse's mother, who coughed in winter like a house with bad lungs. "I'll find a mule no one's looking at and put a pack on it." Evelyn smiled the ghost of a smile. "Men are always looking at mules. They see themselves." The West always kept its promises, though never the ones you prayed for. By dusk, Dust Creek was wound tight as a coiled snake. The wind carried the smell of mesquite smoke, and the streets had gone half empty, shutters closed, Children heard it. Indoors, even the dogs knew what was coming. Sheriff Kincaid stood at the edge of town, his coat collar turned up against the rising grit. Behind him, Alma Bell kept the saloon doors propped open like a stage set waiting for its actors. She polished. Glasses that didn't need polishing, her hands steady, but her jaw hard. Lute Briscoe shuffled cards by the window, dealing hands to ghosts. Every man and woman left in town leaned into their routines with an intensity that said this might be the last one we get to have. And then the horizon lit. Lanterns bobbed like swamp lights along the ridge, weaving and swarming until they became a chain of fire in motion. The Blackthorn gang rode down in a line that looked more like a funeral procession than an army. 30 men at least, dust shrouding them like mourners' veils. Amos Blackthorn led, tall in the saddle, coat flaring, face hidden beneath the brim of a white hat that had never seen honest labor. His stallion was coal-black, restless with muscle, eyes reflecting the torches his riders carried. They came in without hurry, savoring the dread they dragged behind them. The horses struck sparks from the stones. The torches hissed and spat, throwing shadows on walls that had only ever known candlelight. When they stopped at the edge of town, Blackthorn lifted his arm. The line fanned out like a comb, riders spreading to every corner of Dust Creek. Torches dipped into haystacks. Lantern oil splashed against wooden siding. One spark, then another, and the town's night lit brighter than noon. The first barn went up with a whoosh, like a man exhaling. Chickens scattered, screaming. Horses broke their ties and bolted. Fire climbed walls with a hunger you could almost hear. Within minutes, Dust Creek glowed red at its edges, a circle of flame closing in on itself. Amos Blackthorn nudged his horse forward, his voice cutting through the crackle of fire and the shouts of townsfolk trying to save their homes. "Bring me Evelyn Kane," he bellowed, "or I burn this place clean off the map." His words rolled like a sermon from a pulpit built on ash. "You think she's worth your barns? Your wagons? Your children's supper? She's mine. Always was. She carries what belongs to me, and no soul in this county will hide her from me. Hand her over, and Dust Creek wakes tomorrow, same as today. Refuse." He swept his arm to take in the flames, and Dust Creek became smoke. Sheriff Kincaid stepped into the middle of the street, boots steady, voice rough but loud. "Blackthorn, you got no claim here. You ride through, you ride out. That's all. You start a war, you'll have to bury it yourself." Blackthorn laughed, a sound with no warmth. "Lawman, you think your badge will stop fire?" He leaned. In the saddle, torchlight crawling across the scars on his face. "Your badge is tinder." Kincaid's hand hovered near his gun, but didn't draw. "You want to fight, you'll find one, but you won't get her." The gang jeered, torches thrust high. One rider smashed a window with a rifle butt. Another tipped a rain barrel just to spill what little water the town had stored. Flames leapt to the roof of the Mercantile, painting the sky with orange wings. Inside the saloon, Alma rang the bell under her counter. Its iron tongue sang sharp, loud enough for the whole town to hear. It was the sound that meant choose your side now. The townsfolk froze for a heartbeat, then scattered to fetch rifles, shotguns, and the old pistols that had lain hidden since the last raid. Fear made their hands shake, but fear also sharpened teeth. Dust Creek wasn't rich, but it wasn't spineless. Still, no one missed the truth. 30 riders against a town of farmers and gamblers was no fight. It was a hanging. Up on the ridge, Caleb Ward had been watching. He had ridden out after retrieving Evelyn's ledger, circling the edge of the gang's approach like a coyote keeping his distance from a pack of wolves. Now he saw the flames, heard the bell, and knew the town was cornered. Evelyn, pale but upright, had insisted on being at his side despite the pain cutting through her ribs. She clutched the locket in one hand, her knuckles white. "Hale, tear Dust Creek apart for me," she said. "You can still ride. Leave me here, let them take me, and you'll live." Caleb turned his eyes from the burning town to her. "I buried one woman already because I couldn't stop men like them. I won't dig another grave." Evelyn stared at him, breath trembling. "Then you'll die with me?" He adjusted the rifle in his saddle scabbard, checked the chamber. By touch, better than living without trying. And with that, he nudged his gelding forward, down toward the firelit streets of Dust Creek. The lonely rancher rode into the blaze, one man against the gang, his silhouette black against the burning sky. The street of Dust Creek burned like a battlefield before the first shot was fired. Amos Blackthorne sat high on his stallion, torchlight licking the brim of his pale hat, a smile crawling over his face as if the fire were his choir. His men shifted. In their saddles, pistols loose, rifles resting across pommels, torches clenched like brands in the other hand. Then from the far edge of town, the sound came hooves steady, iron ringing on the packed dirt. One rider, not a posse, not a charge. Just one. Caleb Ward rode in slow, his gelding's ears flat, his coat catching sparks. He carried his rifle across his lap like a statement already written. Dust Creek held still, every door shutter half open, every hand hovering at latch or gunstock. The town was waiting to see if this was salvation or suicide. Evelyn Kane sat upright on a bay mare behind him, pale as paper, breath tight with pain, but jaw locked. She would not be dragged back into darkness hiding. If they wanted her, she would be seen. Blackthorne let out a short bark of laughter. "Well, look here, the ghost rancher. Caleb Ward, man who thought loneliness was armor. You mean to trade yourself for the girl?" Caleb swung down from the saddle, boots crunching cinders. "No trade," he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried. "She doesn't belong to you. She doesn't belong to anyone." "Pretty words," Blackthorne said, leaning forward in his saddle. "But this isn't a sermon. This is a debt collection." Caleb's rifle came up, smooth as breath, then collected in blood. The shot cracked. One of Blackthorne's riders pitched sideways off his horse before the echo finished. The silence broke like glass gunfire burst. Torches flared. Horses screamed. Dust Creek erupted. Townsfolk fired from windows, from behind barrels, from rooftops. The Blackthorne men wheeled and answered, bullets tearing through shutters, glass shattering, the piano in Alma's saloon shrieking as a round punched through its belly. Fire spread from roof to roof, heat blistering the night. Caleb moved like a man who'd waited years for this. He dropped to one knee, cycling the rifle, every shot placed with a hunter's patience. One outlaw tumbled from his saddle. Another spun, clutching his chest. He never wasted a bullet. Every crack of his rifle bought the town another breath. Evelyn crouched behind a water trough, pistol in hand, though her ribs screamed at the recoil. She fired once, missed, steadied herself, and fired again. The man who had dragged her by the wrist months before fell face first into the dust-dot Sheriff Kincaid joined from the saloon porch, revolver blazing, coat snapping with each recoil. "Hold your lines," he roared, voice hoarse. "Don't let them break the street." His hat flew off, a bullet cutting clean through the crown, but he kept firing, steady as a metro Alma bell, apron flaring in the heat, smashed bottles. To make fire breaks, then hauled out her father's long gun from behind the bar. She fired through the windows with the cold efficiency of a woman who'd been waiting for a chance to put her aim to use. The fight churned Dust Creek into a storm of smoke and lead. Outlaws galloped through the street, firing wild, flames leaping. From barns to eaves, dust mixing with ash until it felt like the world itself was burning. Then Amos Blackthorn rode forward, pistol high, his stallion charging. He aimed not at the town but at Caleb himself. "Ward!" he roared. "Let's see if your grief can shoot straight." Their guns barked almost in unison. Caleb's bullet smashed Blackthorn's hat from his head, tearing the crown. Blackthorn's round grazed Caleb's shoulder, spinning him half a step. Pain flared, hot and sharp, but Caleb did not drop. He steadied, leveled his rifle, and held Blackthorn in his sights. Evelyn screamed from her cover. "Don't give him the chance." Blackthorn spurred his stallion, closing the distance, eyes blazing with a madness that had been earned one cruelty at a time. He fired again, the bullet whistling past Caleb's ear. Caleb squeezed the trigger. The shot struck home. Blackthorn jerked backward, then forward, clinging to the saddle horn before tumbling hard into the dust. His pistol clattered beside him. The gang faltered, the sight of their leader fallen tearing the venom from their charge. "Hold!" one of them shouted, but the fire in their eyes dimmed. Without Blackthorn's shadow to give them shape, they were just men hungry, tired, and afraid of dying in someone else's feud. Shots wavered, horses reared. And then, as sudden as the storm had come, the gang broke. They scattered in twos and threes, vanishing into the dark plains beyond the firelit ridge, leaving Amos Blackthorn bleeding in the street of the town he had promised to burn. Dust Creek went quiet, except for the groan of collapsing timbers and the hiss of fire eating itself. Sheriff Kincaid limped forward, reloading as he went. Alma emerged from the saloon, hair wild, apron torn. Townsfolk crept into the street, stunned, soot-streaked, clutching guns that smelled of powder. Evelyn rose from her cover, her pistol slack in her hand. She staggered toward Caleb, who leaned heavy on his rifle now, the wound in his shoulder bleeding through his shirt. She reached him, eyes shining through ash and tears. "You could have left me." "I could have," Caleb said. His voice was rough, but steady. "But I didn't." Blackthorn coughed in the dirt, blood bubbling at his lips. He tried to lift his head, tried to find his gun, but his hand fell short. Caleb looked at him once long enough to see the weight of a man's ruin, and then turned away. The sheriff knelt by Blackthorn, pressing a boot to the man's wrist. "You'll hang," Kincaid said, voice flat, "if you live the night." The gang was broken. The town was scarred. The flames would leave half the building's cinders, but Dust Creek still stood. And in its heart, one lonely rancher had fought not for land, not for cattle, not for gold, but for the battered woman who had whispered no more pain. "My ribs are already broken." Together they watched the fire die, leaning into one another, bruised, but unbroken. Dust Creek would tell the story for years of how a rancher stood against the whole West, and how in that stand, something harder than grief and stronger than loneliness had taken root. And for Caleb and Evelyn, it was not legend. It was the beginning of something that no fire, no outlaw, and no whisper could burn away.